Thank you, Deputies. And now I'll take leaders' questions under Standing Order 38, Deputy MaryLouMcDonald.
Before I begin, I would like to congratulate our undisputed world champion, Katie Taylor, on an incredible victory in Madison Square Gardens on a Saturday morning. And Katie, as we know, has fought all over the world. She's walked many times into the lion's den, but I know lots of people now are anticipating the mother and father of all homecomings and a fight maybe in Croke Park.
They're here.
Taoiseach, you have comprehensively ruled out providing a cost of living package in October's budget. The media today is full of reports that you're set to double down on the removal of support payments for struggling households. At a time when living costs are through the roof, when people are hit by skyrocketing prices from every direction, your government proposes to abandon households with no help. And the promises you made during the election disappear like snow off a ditch. People frankly can't believe their ears when they hear you talk as if sky-high living costs they experience every day are a thing of the past. Extortionate prices are not past tense, Taoiseach. People are being fleeced now, today. Fleeced when they open their electricity or gas bill, when they get to the checkout with the weekly shop, when they go to fill the car, when they go to buy basic toiletries like toothpaste or shampoo. The out-of-control cost of living is making it so hard for working people to keep their heads above water now, as we speak. And so for you to tell households that you're not going to help them, to almost boast that you're determined not to help, shows that you really don't understand the pressure that people are under. And people aren't looking for lip service. They're not looking for sympathy from government. They are looking for support and for fair play. And they're not getting a whole lot of fairness right now. For one thing, households in Ireland are paying 30% more on their electricity bills each year than the EU average. That's nearly €350 more. The ESRI says that it is difficult to explain why electricity prices here are so far above other countries. People are taken for a ride, and now you propose to cancel the very help that they desperately need with their energy bills. Taoiseach, you should be continuing to provide energy credits as part of a cost of living package in the budget.
Hear, hear.
That's the truth. So we've had 6 months of your do-nothing government, and now the Dáil rises. And as the Dáil rises for the summer, you leave people only with stress and uncertainty. People facing big rent hikes next year, thanks to you. Students and their families facing a big hike in college fees, thanks to you. And thanks to you, tens of thousands of families left without cost of living supports and wondering how on earth they will make it through the winter. Ní féidir leis an rialtas teaghlaí atá stracailt le ardtha phrais is smacht a réicint. Caithfidh sibh pacáis de costas marachtáil a thuairt chun tosaí sa bhuiséad. Taoiseach, households are under enormous pressure right now, unable to keep up with soaring prices, and government simply cannot abandon workers and families like this. So I'm now putting it to you that you must include a cost of living package in October's budget.
Taoiseach to respond, please.
Dus beide ní ein team net nechar, Marnile an áras go bhfuil annach bedentig an bhiltas kann an brú atá chorathair cosfuinte na tíre de jaske an ID an arde costas marachtála tána chuid dénta an brú sinna ísliú agus tána chuid dénta going chuna sinna dhéanamh. And in passing also, I would like to congratulate Katie Taylor, an outstanding win, one of our outstanding sports persons who's done extraordinary work in terms of elevating the role of women in sport and has brought great pride and distinction to the nation and to the sport of boxing. I don't agree with your analysis, Deputy, in terms of the government not going to help them, or the government doing nothing and telling people that it doesn't recognise the fact that prices are at a relatively elevated level following the peaking of inflation. Remember, inflation peaked at about 10% in the immediate aftermath of COVID-19 and following the Russian invasion of Ukraine at close to 10%. And what's interesting is, of course, government did an awful lot. We did more than any other European government, actually, in terms of cushioning and trying to reduce the impact of that cost of living increases on people. And we continue to do that. In April, we decided to extend the VAT reduction to 9% on gas and electricity. This measure will save households €70 for gas and €55 for electricity. And then Minister O'Brien took a further decision in June of a 40% reduction in the renewable electricity PSO levy. From September onwards, there will be a significant increase in the number of people who qualify for the fuel allowance. And since the 1st of June, women can receive HRT free of charge. At the beginning of June, the Carers Support Grant increased to €2,000. This is the highest level ever, and that benefits some 138,000 carers. And last week, the income level disregard increased for the carers allowance, meaning more people will qualify for the allowance, and more than 5,000 carers will receive an increase in their payments. And then we have the back-to-school clothing and footwear allowance will be paid out over the summer months, and that's been extended for the first time to foster carers. From September, the free school book scheme continues to be extended towards students in post-primary schools, and from September all primary schools are eligible for the free hot school meals programme. A school meals holiday pilot project has started this summer, and free public transport for children aged 5 to 8 will be introduced later this year. So far from your assertions that government is doing nothing, we have taken all of these measures on top of the measures that we took in budget 2025 and also as part of the public service paying agreement. But it's also worth noting that inflation in Ireland will come down to about 1.6%. This year. We will have the third, you referenced our positioning within the European Union, we actually will have the third lowest rate of inflation among the 27 member EU countries. And given the strength of the domestic economy, that's quite a remarkable outcome vis-a-vis other European countries. Nominal wage growth is set to reach 5.5% this year. That will result in real incomes rising rise of between 3 and 3.5% per annum. And that's important because we are turning the tide in terms of this issue. That follows increases in real incomes in 2024 and further increases, future increases forecast for 2026. So the focus in the budget quite simply has to be on dramatically transforming our infrastructure, which we committed to in the general election. This has to be an era when we transform our roads, our public transport, energy, and in terms of water utilities.
Thank you,
and that's to help the Irish people in terms of growth and jobs into the future. And there will have to be a predominant allocation of capital to these key agenda items.
So, Taoiseach, the deficit in our infrastructure is on you. Yeah. Just remember you've presided over that. And yes, you're right, investment needs to be made. The mistakes that you have made in the past number of administrations, yourself and Fine Gael, have to be corrected. You're absolutely right there. But you're entirely missing where families and where people's lives are at. Yeah. You're right to say that the rate of inflation has fallen, and thank God for that. But what you're entirely missing is the fact that prices have not followed suit. And anybody who goes into a supermarket or a shop or who opens up their bill can tell you that we are in a place where households are still struggling. By the way, on your record, in the last 5 months, home heating oil prices up by €25 a fill, petrol and diesel up in May, you're going for that again in October, local property tax up, rents up, students' fees, as we know, due also to go up. So you have shown no regard, no sensitivity for the realities of struggling households and workers, and I am simply asking you to please wake up and become aware of the realities of people's lives. People need these supports. They will need a cost of living package come October. Mark my words.
There will be supports in the budget in respect of supporting people deal with the cost of living. Food inflation in Ireland in May was 4%. We're mid-table across the European Union. This is a European-wide phenomenon. It's a global phenomenon in terms of what's happened with the energy crisis. I love the way you just toss aside, oh, infrastructure's on you. I don't have to account for that at all. Sorry, we've spent record levels of investment in the last 4 years, okay? We're going to go further again, because the most important thing for the future of this economy is that we make sure that we substantially increase and double the investment, more than double the investment in the energy grid, so that we have connections, that we can deal with the growing population and growing economy, that we have huge investment in water, that we have huge investment in public transport and in roads. That's what underpins the economy. And I think that will be a more effective allocation of spending and prioritisation of the surpluses that we'll have at the end of this year and hopefully into the future. Notwithstanding the very significant, difficult backdrop in terms of the US imposing tariffs, very high tariffs potentially on the world, which will put a lot of predictions out.
Deputy Ivana Bacik.
Last week I joined an incredibly moving event on Kildare Street, organised by the Grannies for Palestine group. They unveiled a patchwork crochet banner stretching the whole length of Kildare Street across the front of Leinster House. Devastatingly, each square in the banner was crafted to represent 10 Gazan children who've been killed since Hamas's barbaric attack in October 2023. That means, Taoiseach, approximately 30 children who've been killed every day in the nearly 650 days since Israel launched its genocidal war on Gaza. Even since last week, Taoiseach, we saw the horrific scene, 6 children killed by an Israeli airstrike while collecting water in Gaza this week. Even the Israeli Defence Force is saying this was an error. Taoiseach, the protest group that were out on Kildare Street last week had a clear ask of your government. They asked that your government would pass the Occupied Territories Bill in full. And that's what I want to raise with you today in the final sitting week before the recess. We know, Taoiseach, that Gazan Civil Defence reports more than 58,000 people in total have now been killed by Israel in Gaza. Men, women, journalists, medics, aid workers and children, dead at the hands of Netanyahu's brutal regime that is now facing criticism even from its own former leaders in Israel, describing plans to resettle Gaza as akin to a concentration camp. And the gravity of a former Israeli Prime Minister using that language will be wasted on no one in this House. So, Taoiseach, who will say stop and take action to force a stop to the genocide? So, Taoiseach, I think we all want to hear from you a commitment that you will, without delay, legislate for the Occupied Territories Bill to ban trade in goods and in services. And we're prepared to sit over the summer, if needs be, to get that done. I've welcomed, as my Labour colleagues have, the positive steps your government has taken, and we acknowledge these. Support for the UN resolution for a ceasefire in Gaza. Crucially, recognition by Ireland of the state of Palestine. We welcome that. Just as we welcome last month's action by the Taoiseach, who was one of 8 foreign ministers to write to the EU Commission calling for a ban on all trade with Israeli settlements in goods and services. So it seems, Taoiseach, you and the Taoiseach do recognise your obligation to ban trade in services under EU and international law following the ICJ advisory opinion. In a recent meeting of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Department of Foreign Affairs also accepted that limiting a ban to trade on goods would leave you just partially compliant with international law. Under EU law, we know there is scope for member states to act and to act unilaterally, and Israel's war crimes create a clear and pressing obligation to end all trade in goods and in services, just as Senator Francis Black's original bill sought to do. So, Taoiseach, before the summer recess, will you give a commitment that the Occupied Territories Bill will cover goods and services, and will you ensure that Ireland continues to be at the fore in pushing for a stronger stance from the EU to stop the genocide in Gaza?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
First of all, I thank the Deputy for her presentation, and I would pay tribute to Grannies for Palestine in highlighting the genocide against children in Gaza, the slaughter of children indiscriminately by indiscriminate bombing, and now the indiscriminate shooting at food checkpoints, which we have witnessed via those who have captured those images on social media. We often complain about the use of social media in other spheres, but it's worth bearing in mind that without social media in Gaza, the world would literally be blind to the appalling atrocities that have occurred there. And many journalists have paid with their lives in trying to bring the horrible truth of what is happening. And the latest iteration being an idea around what a former Israeli Prime Minister has described as a concentration camp. And you have, to be fair to you, identified all the measures that we have taken. And the Occupied Territories Bill will be a further measure that we will take. And I think it needs to be legislated for. It needs to be debated fully so that we're clear-eyed in terms of it. It is largely symbolic, if we're honest. And unfortunately, it seems to me, given everything that has happened to date, that Israel is oblivious to the views of people across Europe, oblivious to public opinion, to international opinion, has sought consistently to denigrate and undermine multilateral organisations, which I think is a very serious matter in terms of the United Nations. And I believe we should collectively be calling for the primacy of the United Nations in conflict zones, and particularly in Gaza and indeed in the West Bank. So there's been a consistent pattern of undermining UNRWA and other OCHA and other UN agencies, without whom life would be absolutely unbearable, and is unbearable now because, of course, they've been denied the opportunity to bring aid into Gaza. And the European Union, we did have a fairly honest discussion at the European Council, and the issue rose as to who has the influence over Israel. Now, the United States has very significant leverage and influence over Israel. I would have thought other European countries have. I'm not so sure now. And the EU have made entreaties to Israel, and we're told that there will be further aid coming in. I believe it when I see it. And it can't be a kind of a negotiation on the basis of, oh, give us a bit and give us a bit. Like, there has to be a comprehensive framework for the facilitation of humanitarian aid going into Gaza. And that is not there yet. And I think we have to engage with Europe, with the US, in order to keep that pressure on the need for a ceasefire, on the release of all hostages, but above all now, on a massive surge in humanitarian aid into Gaza.
Taoiseach, Deputy Ivana Bacik.
We will keep pressing on the Occupied Territories Bill, but Taoiseach, there is more here in Ireland that your government could be doing to show solidarity with the people of Palestine, and in particular the children of Palestine. First, I've been working for some months now seeking urgent action from government to bring desperately sick children out of Gaza on a medical evacuation with their families, and we do need to do more on that. And again, I'm appealing to you and the Justice and Health Ministers on that. And further, in recent days, like so many others across the country, I'm really concerned to see the refusal of visas to the group of children and their mentors due to travel here from the West Bank with the GAA Palestine group. And Taoiseach, is there anything that can be done at this stage to facilitate this group coming here? I think we've all listened to the families here who are really distressed that this trip is apparently not going to proceed because of actions by our own Department of Foreign Affairs or decisions taken there. Can we at this point ensure that this visit goes ahead?
Deputy Taoiseach.
Could I say very resolutely, there's been no delay in the evacuation of children in respect of children who require hospital treatment or medical treatment. Absolutely no delay, and I think it's important that we get truth on that. And I'm happy, Deputy, for you to meet with the Minister for Health and the Minister for Justice, who will apprise you of the details of this. And in fact, we're, relative to other European countries, Ireland is well up. I think we're number 5 across the EU in terms of, we're placed 5th overall in terms of the number of patients that have been evacuated to European countries, after Italy, Romania, Spain and Norway. And we will do everything we possibly can. There's a further 18 to come, bringing us to 30. The issues are logistical, but we're working with the WHO through the Egypt crossing, okay? Sorry, Deputy, it's Deputy Bacik's moment. And we will work, but it has to be with the WHO. It simply has to be in terms of protocols, looking after the children, making sure everything is done properly. And we've agreed today that we formalise what is already happening. More family members can come in with the children because there could be issues. So there will be total family unification, and there has been in respect of that, and will be for the next 18. But there's no delay on our side in terms of those 18. Now, there are others. The GA, sorry, if I could, on the GA, I'm perplexed by this. No appeal has gone in. There was no pre-engagement with anyone here on government side. I'm not clear even in the Gaelic Athletic Association formally. There's a bit of a
Time is up, Taoiseach, and maybe there
I'd
is
say no
a
more than
further
this.
question
I'm
from
not
Deputy
comfortable
O'Callaghan.
with how this has been handled overall.
Social Democrats.
Not on our side now, but on the side
Thank
of
you,
our
Taoiseach. Deputy
We have
Cian
child
O'Callaghan.
welfare. We have to be fully conscious of our obligations to child welfare and child well-being
Deputy
and how we
Cian
handle all of
O'Callaghan.
this.
Deputy Cian O'Callaghan.
Taoiseach, it's no exaggeration to say that primary care services for children around the country are at breaking point. Figures obtained by my colleague Liam McQuaid reveal the depths of the crisis. The longest wait time for speech and language therapy in primary care services in Dublin is 6 years, Taoiseach. In North Lee area in Cork, one child has been waiting 7 years for physiotherapy. For occupational therapy in primary care, there are huge waiting lists. A child in Meath has been left waiting 9 years, Taoiseach, and a child in North Dublin 10 years. When it comes to psychology services, a child in Galway has been left waiting 9 years. While in Dublin, one young person has been on a waiting list for more than 13 years. Taoiseach, leaving children on waiting lists for 6 years, 7 years, 9 years, 10 years and 13 years is utterly unacceptable. 13 years left waiting on for psychological services since 2012. How can you possibly defend this? How can you let this happen, Taoiseach? You've been in office since 2020. You've had more than enough time to sort this out. The impact on children and young people and their families has been catastrophic. Early intervention, as you know, is crucial and makes all the difference so that children can reach their full potential. These waiting lists mean that thousands of children all over the country are suffering unnecessarily. They're having problems communicating, having difficulties at school, coordination challenges, all of which could be made more manageable with timely intervention. Taoiseach, the reality is these services have been run into the ground by your governments. In the last government, you stood over a recruitment embargo in the health service. At the time, the Irish Association of Speech and Language Therapists said it was aware of vacancy rates of up to 45%. You then replaced that embargo with another barrier to recruitment, the pay in numbers strategy, in July 2024. This capped employment at December 2023 levels. It meant previously funded positions, which could not be filled during the recruitment embargo, were simply abolished. Critical services in primary care were just expected to cope with soaring referrals and reduced staffing. But of course they couldn't, and children all over the country paid the price for this. Taoiseach, the only thing children are guaranteed is a place on a waiting list. This can't go on. Not only has this government not addressed this crisis, you've made it worse. 13 years on a waiting list, Taoiseach, how can you stand over that? Taoiseach, do you accept responsibility for these waiting lists? And will you commit to an urgent recruitment drive for primary care services?
We've had the biggest expansion of access to free GP care in the history of the state, which you didn't reference in your presentation on primary care services. The biggest expansion of access to free GP care in the history of the state. 2.3 million people are now eligible in this country for free GP care. I would ask you, in terms of the individual cases that you instanced, to forward me the details in relation to them. And could I say at the outset that you mentioned a recruitment embargo. There has been no recruitment embargo. And we do need to get a bit real here. I mean, we're close to 30,000 extra people in our health service in the last 5 years. 30,000. And you talk about an embargo? There's 6,000 more in 2025 will be employed. There will be thousands more employed next year, additional. Now, maybe a more pertinent question is to ask, are we getting the outputs for the huge investment that has gone into health over the last 5 years? But that's a separate question. But I know we do, but you'll never ask it because you don't want to follow with anybody, which is understandable coming from the opposition side. You don't want to follow with anybody. But there are issues here now in terms of how we deal with therapists. We have set up a new in-school therapy service for children in special schools, starting out with those. That's starting in September. We've already allocated money for that, additional to the estimate that was provided. That will be significant. Recruitment is increasing significantly now for the CDNT teams in terms of recruitment of therapists, and they're filling more posts. But that needs to happen. We want to increase upon that again in 2025 and 2026, and we're dramatically ramping up places, and have been for quite some time in our colleges, to produce more therapists to come out on an annual basis. We do need to look at how we deploy therapists, and that is why we have said here in the House that we want to bring in legislation to prioritise access to therapies and amend the existing situation pertaining to assessment of need, because that is not serving children well right now. We've acknowledged that. There are issues with delays in terms of accessing vital services, but we're prepared to do something about it. I would appreciate your support in respect of that legislation when it comes before the House, because what that will do is prioritise access to services and access to therapies, as opposed to waiting to get the assessment of need first and then access therapies. The existing legislative template has not worked in practice, and in my view, legal decisions subsequently has obliged us to act to deal with that difficult issue. But it has to be, the nettle has to be grasped on that to bring about an improvement in terms of how we best use our therapists
Thank you,
in this country.
Deputy
because we have increased a lot
O'Callaghan.
more therapists in employment than we had maybe 5,
Thank
6,
you.
7, 8 years ago.
Deputy O'Callaghan.
Taoiseach, I asked you specifically about primary care teams and your failure to staff them properly, which has led to a situation where you have waiting lists for primary care for children of up to, in the worst case, a 13-year wait for a child. That's what I asked you about. You didn't address the shortages in primary care teams in your answer to me as well. You addressed other issues. You didn't address the primary care teams. So I'm asking you, do you take responsibility for this, or are you just pointing the finger at others? You've been Taoiseach and Taoiseach now for 6 years. So do you take responsibility for this? Are you going to fix it? Are you going to start recruiting to fill these empty posts in primary care teams? And are you actually going to tackle this? Or do you actually think that this isn't somehow acceptable to have such extreme waiting times for children for primary care teams? Do you stand over it, or are you going to fix it, Taoiseach?
We will continue to work to recruit. We have been recruiting. I mean, 6.71 billion increase in expenditure on health. That's 35% increase in health spending since 2020. So don't say we're cutting back or we're not allocating. You can't say that with credibility. So we've allocated.
Sorry, Deputy,
right?
allow the response.
And that's a very fundamental point. And by the way, you asked me, we've made huge impacts across a lot of areas in health in the last 5 years, to such an extent. I know this would be over a longer period, but our mortality rate has fell by 11% over the decade 2014 to 2022. We now have the second lowest mortality rate among the European 27. So the investment is having impacts of a positive nature. Are there significant issues? Yes, particularly in terms of access to some primary care services, mental health services, and above all therapies. But we are allocating. There have been issues within the HSE in terms of recruitment and retention
Deputy
in some
Peadar,
areas,
Toibin.
and those are being worked on.
Taoiseach, Ireland is at the precipice of the biggest economic crisis facing this country since the banking crisis. And the tariff war has the potential to destroy tens of thousands of Irish jobs, significantly cut back on GDP, and hammer the budgetary income of the state. Now, you wouldn't know it here, but the tariff war is the biggest economic threat to the state. And Ireland is one of the most exposed countries in the EU to the US tariff war. Ireland exports far more relatively than other European countries to the United States. And actually, last year we exported 72.6 billion euros worth of goods to the US. Now, what's happening in Europe is actually quite frightening. We've heard the French President, Macron, call on the EU to take a tougher stance against the potential US threatened tariffs. And the EU is hardening its position in terms of the tariff. Now, the approach of those countries that are less exposed to Ireland seems to be having more of an influence in terms of the EU Commission in relation to its new retaliation policy. The EU has settled on that retaliation policy. It has identified 72 billion euros worth of US goods. And it's really unclear, Taoiseach, at this stage, if this government has had any influence in relation to that process. So the government lobbied the EU to avoid a tax on bourbon. The government lobbied the EU to avoid a tax on, or a tariff on US aircraft and plane parts, to avoid medical devices, to avoid the agri-food sector in relation to retaliatory tariffs. Yet all of those sectors are now in the target for EU retaliatory tariffs. Bourbon, Boeing and butter are a focus of the EU in relation to this. And this is a really big difficulty. Like, you're talking about the aircraft leasing sector. It has a 300 billion euro value in this state, 10,000 aircraft located here. Medical devices has 16 billion euros worth of exports. The whisky sector currently is stopping production right through this state at the moment. Now, there has been a beeline of Irish ministers, rightly so, to the EU to see could we put pressure on the EU to take Ireland's interests into consideration into this. But they haven't. Other than purebred horse racing, Taoiseach, there's precious little in this particular plan by the EU for Ireland. Now, you know, I do think that this government has been great in outsourcing decisions to the EU, but I do believe as well that we also need to focus pressure on the United States. There is no French-American vote. There is no German-American vote. There's no EU-American vote. But there is an Irish-American vote. And when you were in the Oval Office, Trump basically admitted that that was the case. We need to use that leverage in terms of our influence with the United States to build a bridge between the US and the EU in relation to our national interests.
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach.
The last sentence, I find that a fairly bizarre presentation. You're blaming the European Union. Europe didn't impose any tariffs. No, I'm not missing it at all. Your entire 3 minutes was the European Union is doing this, the European Union is doing that, the French have more influence than the Irish.
Please.
It's absolute nonsense, if you don't mind me saying so. It's the US have imposed the tariffs, Deputy, not Europe. The US. We don't want tariffs. Europe doesn't want tariffs. They're bad for the economy. They're bad for people, patients, industry, businesses. They're just bad news. And they will damage the world economy if this continues. There's terrible uncertainty, there's terrible volatility, and the result of all that is a pause on investment decisions, which is also a critical outcome so far of what has transpired over the last 6 months. Now, to be fair, I would actually disagree further with you. The Irish position has been, up to now, to avoid any escalatory response by Europe. I've spoken to the President of the Commission. The President of the Commission is of the same view. So is the negotiator Maros Sefcovic. Tánaiste has spoken to Maros Sefcovic. I have as well. The whole strategy of the European Commission here, and the vast majority of the European Union Council, has been to avoid an overreactive response, notwithstanding the fact that there's fairly severe tariffs on the motor industry, which a lot of EU countries are bleeding a lot as a result of right now. So it's easy for us in here to be, yourself to pontificate we should do this, that and the other. If you lived in Germany or Czechia right now and you're a worker in the car industry, you're feeling it. And so did the UK, and that's why the UK has done the deal with what's called a framework agreement with the US. And the latest iteration of this has been the announcement of a potential 30% tariff, not the 10%, 30% by August the 1st. And I would say to you, the EU at that stage has no option but to respond if that materialises. There's no point in getting worried about an individual component here or sector there. If you're getting tariffs of 30%, that is ruinous, that is very destructive of our economy and of America's economy as well. And we hope that doesn't come to pass. Europe wants to prioritise negotiation. There's no evidence, by the way, in terms of what you said, that France and others have got the way. They haven't, actually, in the sense that some would have liked a more robust response already, but Europe has played it calm, firm, have been involved in negotiations, had good reason to believe that there was a deal on the table, an outline framework agreement in principle on the table up to a couple of days before the weekend. That all changed. So there's new reality now. to August the 1st. And Europe will
Deputy Toibin to respond.
hope that we can get into a negotiation
Thank you,
process.
Taoiseach, every day you come into this chamber and you ask a different question, you answer a different question than the one is actually asked from yourself. You are the king of deflection when it comes to these issues. And the reality is this issue is far too important. There are tens of thousands of Irish jobs at stake. And your government is at the back of the class when it comes to influencing the EU Commission in terms of how it structures its retaliation in terms of tariffs. Because out of all the issues we discussed, we saw Simon Harris go to the EU Commission last week and ask for a number of different issues. All of those have been refused. All of them have been refused. And as a result, we're enormously exposed. We're already exposed in relation to how you've structured this economy. 10 international companies pay 50% of the corporation tax in this country. These international companies pay a third of all the taxes we pay. Stephen Kinsella, who's already an advisor to your government, has said that Ireland is the most exposed of any developed country in terms of the business model that we're using. Now, I'm asking you, what influence did you use to defend the whisky sector?
Thank you,
what
Deputy.
influence did you use to defend the Meditech Centre? What influence did you use to defend the Agricultural Centre and the Aircraft Centre? Because you have failed in terms of those.
First of all, I'd say, Deputy, you've described me as the king of deflection. As a true Republican, I never did royalty and don't propose to do so now. But could I say to you, Deputy, in this matter, that we haven't failed in any respect, because Europe has avoided retaliation, notwithstanding a fair degree of provocation by the way of imposition of tariffs. I mean, there is an effective 10% tariff for the last number of months now. Europe has avoided overreacting to this and have gone down the route of a negotiated settlement and solution with the United States government. The US have issues, we acknowledge. They can be resolved via negotiation. That's what we want to do. I don't believe in tariffs. We acknowledge fully the exposure of this country to damage from any tariff imposition, because we're a small, open economy. And I'm glad you have embraced that, because there was times when you didn't. And also, we have no issue with being a bridge with the US. And in terms of, take the pharmaceutical sector, for example. Ireland is not isolated in that.
Thank
There's
you,
a broader,
Deputy. That
up to
concludes
10 EU
leaders'
countries now
questions.
joined together in
Thank you,
respect to the
Taoiseach, and in
pharmaceutical
accordance
sector.
with standing